Most people still believe communication begins when words are spoken. That's the first mistake. Long before a sentence is formed, long before someone says, "Trust me," or "I'm telling the truth," the body has already made its confession. Human beings are constantly broadcasting information they don't even realize they're sending. A slight pause before answering a simple question. A forced smile that fades too quickly. The subtle tightening of the jaw when a certain topic appears. These aren't random behaviors. They are emotional Liechtenstein fractures in the performance people try so carefully to maintain. And this is where an empath operates differently from everyone else. They are not listening to your words first. They are reading the tension underneath them. While most people are distracted by language, an empath is watching rhythm, energy, timing, and emotional consistency. They notice when your voice is calm but your body is restless. They notice when your words sound polished but your presence feels chaotic. This is because human truth rarely travels through language alone. It moves through patterns, through nervous system reactions, through the unconscious signals people cannot fully control. What makes this uncomfortable is that many people spend years mastering what to say, but almost no time mastering what they project. They learn scripts. They learn charm. They learn how to sound believable. But believability is not truth, and an empath can feel that difference instantly. Think about those moments when someone says they're happy for you, but something feels off. Their words are supportive, yet the energy carries resentment. Or when someone insists nothing is wrong but the air around them feels heavy, sharp, closed. Most people ignore that signal because they've been conditioned to trust language over instinct. An empath doesn't. They trust the disturbance. They understand that when words and energy do not match, the body is usually telling the truth, while the mouth is managing perception. This is why lying to an empath rarely works the way people think it does. You may control the sentence, but you cannot fully control the signal behind it. Your nervous system betrays you in ways too subtle for most to catch, yet impossible for a deeply perceptive person to miss. And once that contradiction is felt, trust begins to fracture not because of what was said, but because of what was silently revealed. The unsettling truth is this: people are always telling on themselves. Most just haven't met someone quiet enough, aware enough, and emotionally detached enough to notice. And when they do, they realize something too late. Your words may shape the story, but your energy always exposes the truth. Most people misunderstand silence because they've been conditioned to see it as weakness, discomfort, or emotional retreat. They assume that when someone goes quiet, it means they have nothing to say, no defense to offer, no response prepared. But real silence-controlled silence is one of the most psychologically powerful tools a person can possess, especially in the hands of an empath. Because silence is not emptiness. It is observation without interference. It is emotional discipline in its purest form. When most people feel tension, they rush to fill it. They explain too much, defend too quickly, talk themselves into circles trying to control how they are perceived. Why? Because silence creates exposure. It strips away the comfort of distraction and forces people to sit face to face with their own nervous energy. This is what makes it so comfortable. The human mind is wired to seek resolution, and when that resolution is withheld, pressure builds. The longer the silence lasts, the more revealing behavior becomes. An empath understands this at a level most people never will. They know that the moment they stop reacting emotionally, the entire psychological dynamic shifts. The other person loses their reference point. Think about it in real life. Someone lies, manipulates, or says something designed to provoke. Most people instantly respond with anger, defense, explanation. That reaction gives the manipulator information. It tells them what worked, what hurt, where your emotional openings are. But when an empath responds with silence, something different happens. The liar begins to unravel. They start over-explaining. Their tone changes. They backtrack. They add unnecessary details no one asked for. This is because silence creates a vacuum, and insecure people cannot tolerate vacuums. They rush to fill them, and in doing so, they often reveal the very truth they were trying to conceal. This is not accidental. It is psychological control through emotional restraint. Silence communicates something words never can. I am an Not available for your manipulation. It shows detachment, certainty, and internal stability. And that is deeply unsettling to people who rely on emotional reactions to maintain control. What makes this so powerful is that silence doesn't chase truth, it allows truth to expose itself. It forces the other person to confront their own discomfort without giving them anything to push against. The unsettling reality is that most people fear silence because silence reveals what noise can hide. It exposes insecurity, guilt, desperation, and deception with ruthless precision. An empath knows this. They know that sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, you gain something they can never manipulate again: you power. And nothing terrifies deception more than a person who has mastered the discipline to simply say nothing and see everything. Most people think betrayal happens the moment a lie is discovered. They believe the damage comes from the false words themselves, from the hidden detail, the twisted story, the information that was concealed. But that's a shallow understanding of how the truth is. It usually breaks. The real betrayal is never the lie. The real betrayal is the decision behind it. It's the silent calculation that happened in someone's mind when they chose deception over honesty. That moment reveals something far more disturbing than the lie itself. It reveals how they see you, how they measure your worth, and how they manage discomfort when truth becomes inconvenient. This is the part most people miss because they focus on the content of the lie instead of the psychology that created it. A lie is not just false information. It is a behavioral confession. It tells you exactly what someone values when pressure enters the room. Think about what has to happen psychologically for someone to lie. There is always an internal process. First comes discomfort, fear of consequences, fear of judgment, fear of losing control. Then comes the decision point. In that moment, they choose self-protection over trust. They choose immediate comfort over long-term integrity. And this is where the real fracture begins. Because the lie itself may be small, it may even seem harmless on the surface. A changed detail, a hidden conversation, a carefully edited version of events. But the behavior underneath it says something much louder. I was willing to manipulate your perception to protect my own position. That is the betrayal. This is why emotionally intelligent people, especially empaths, react differently when they catch deception. They are not just reacting to what was said. They are reading the deeper psychological message. They understand that if someone lies when honesty is difficult, that person has already revealed the structure of their character. And character only shows itself under pressure. Anyone can be truthful when truth is easy. Anyone can appear trustworthy when there is nothing at stake. But when discomfort enters, people expose their real operating system. You see this everywhere in everyday life. A friend lies about where they were, not because the truth was catastrophic, but because they wanted to avoid discomfort. A partner hides something small and insists it was to protect your feelings. But if you look closely, it was never about protecting you. It was about protecting themselves from your reaction. This is the hidden truth most people are too uncomfortable to confront. Deception is rarely an act of care. It is usually an act of self-preservation disguised as consideration. And once you understand this, your entire relationship with trust changes. You stop obsessing over the details of the lie and start paying attention to the psychology of the choice. Because words can be corrected, stories can be rewritten, apologies can be rehearsed, but the mindset that made deception feel acceptable tells you everything you need to know. In the end, the lie is only the surface wound. The real betrayal is realizing who someone becomes when honesty costs them something. Most people judge behavior in isolated moments. They look at a single apology, one kind gesture, one convincing explanation, and they allow that moment to define the entire person. It's one of the biggest psychological blind spots human beings have. We are naturally wired to seek immediate resolution. We want to believe the explanation that calms the discomfort fastest, even when our deeper instincts are warning us otherwise. But an empath operates differently. They do not measure people by individual incidents. They measure patterns. And this is what makes their perception so difficult to deceive. Because while most people are reacting to what is happening right now, an empath is unconsciously collecting behavioral data over time. They are tracking emotional consistency, repeated contradictions, shifts in tone, subtle changes in energy, and the rhythm of someone's actions when no one thinks they are being observed. What looks invisible to others forms a very clear psychological map in the empath's mind. This is how human behavior actually works. Isolated incidents can be manipulated, but patterns rarely lie. Anyone can perform sincerity once. Anyone can deliver a convincing apology, show temporary affection, or create a believable excuse in a single moment. People rehearse for these moments. They prepare for them. They know exactly what to say when trust is on the line. But maintaining a false version of yourself over time is psychologically exhausting. Eventually, the cracks begin to show. The same excuses start repeating. The same emotional withdrawal appears after moments of closeness. The same defensiveness emerges whenever accountability enters the conversation. This repetition is not random. It is behavioral leakage. It reveals the underlying psychology a person cannot permanently hide. An empath notices this because they are not hypnotized by intensity. Most people confuse emotional intensity with truth. A dramatic apology feels sincere. Strong eye contact feels honest. Passionate words feel real. But empaths understand something most people never learn. Intensity is easy to perform, consistency is not. They watch what happens after the conversation ends. They observe whether behavior actually changes. They notice whether actions align with promises days later, weeks later, months later. And when the same pattern keeps resurfacing, they stop seeing it as coincidence. Think about someone who repeatedly says, "I didn't mean it like that," every time they hurt someone. Once, it may be misunderstanding. Twice, maybe poor communication. But over time, the pattern reveals something deeper: a refusal to examine their own behavior. Or consider someone who disappears whenever emotional responsibility is required, then returns with charm and reassurance. Most people focus on the warmth of their return. An empath notices the cycle. This is what makes their awareness so unsettling to those who rely on manipulation. They cannot be distracted by single moments because they are watching the full behavioral sequence. They know that truth is not found in isolated actions. It is found in repetition. And once a pattern becomes clear, no amount of explanation can erase what behavior has already confirmed. Because in the end, people can fake a moment, but they always reveal themselves through what they repeatedly choose. Most people misunderstand emotional detachment because they mistake it for coldness, indifference, or a lack of feeling. They imagine detachment as something harsh, almost cruel, as if it means a person has stopped caring altogether. But true emotional detachment is something far more complex and far more powerful. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of it. It is what happens when someone has seen enough patterns, processed enough contradictions, and reached a point where emotional investment no longer makes psychological sense. For an empath, this is never an impulsive decision. It is rarely dramatic. There is no explosion, no desperate confrontation, no need to prove a point. That's what makes it so unsettling. The shift happens quietly, internally, often long before anyone else notices. And by the time the other person realizes what has happened, the connection is already gone. What most people fail to understand is that empaths often give more chances than anyone realizes. They observe, absorb, analyze, and wait. They notice the inconsistencies. They feel the subtle manipulations. They sense the emotional dishonesty beneath carefully chosen words. But they do not detach at the first sign of discomfort. They watch for patterns. They test whether behavior changes. They allow space for accountability and growth. This is why their eventual detachment carries such finality. It is not emotional overreaction. It is a psychological conclusion. There is a hidden truth about human behavior here that makes many people deeply uncomfortable. Most individuals do not respect access until they lose it. As long as emotional availability remains, they assume the connection is secure. They believe apologies can always reset the damage. They think another explanation, another promise, another moment of charm will restore what has been weakened. This belief comes from a dangerous misunderstanding of trust. Trust is not usually destroyed in one dramatic moment. It erodes slowly through repetition, through small betrayals, through unresolved contradictions. And once that erosion reaches a certain point, something changes inside the empath. They stop negotiating with what they already know. This is where emotional detachment becomes their final decision. Not because they stopped feeling, but because they started seeing clearly. And clarity is often mistaken for distance by people who benefited from confusion. You can see this happen in real life. Someone who once responded instantly now takes hours, then days. The emotional warmth disappears. The questions stop. The need for explanation fades. There is no argument because there is no longer anything to argue for. The empath has already completed the emotional exit internally. What makes this so psychologically devastating for the other person is the silence of it. People expect anger because anger means attachment still exists. Anger means there is still emotional investment to work with. But detachment offers nothing to negotiate with. It is the quiet withdrawal of energy, attention, and access. And that silence forces an unbearable realization. They didn't lose someone because of one mistake. They lost them because repeated choices finally made their value impossible to ignore. And by the time they understand it, the absence has already become permanent. Most people believe that lying gives them power. They assume deception creates control, that if they can shape what another person believes, they can shape the outcome in their favor. It feels strategic in the moment. It feels like protection, a way to avoid consequences, maintain image, preserve comfort, or keep emotional leverage. But this is one of the greatest psychological illusions people live under, especially when they lie to an empath. What they fail to understand is that deception does not reveal the empath's vulnerability, it reveals their own. Because the moment a person chooses to lie, they are exposing something they never intended to show. Fear. Fear of being seen clearly. Fear of accountability. Fear that the truth, if exposed, would cost them something they are not emotionally equipped to lose. And fear is always a signal of internal weakness. This is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Strong people do not need deception to navigate discomfort. Emotionally grounded people can tolerate temporary tension for the sake of long-term trust. But when someone lies, what they are really saying is this: I do not trust myself to face the consequences of honesty. That is not control. That is instability disguised as strategy. And an empath sees this instantly. While most people focus on the words being said, an empath senses the psychology underneath them. They feel the tension behind the carefully crafted explanation. They notice the slight hesitation before a response, the unnatural precision in unnecessary details, the emotional disconnection between what is being said and what is being projected. These are not random slips. They are evidence of internal conflict. What makes this dynamic so misunderstood is that people often mistake empathy for softness. They assume that because empaths feel deeply, they must also be easy to manipulate. This couldn't be further from the truth. Emotional sensitivity, when paired with awareness, becomes advanced perception. It allows an empath to detect emotional incongruence long before logical proof appears. They may not challenge the lie immediately. They may not even react. But internally, they are observing, processing, recalibrating. And this is where the liar makes their biggest mistake. They confuse silence for ignorance. You see this constantly in real life. Someone lies to avoid a difficult conversation, thinking they've protected themselves. A partner hides a truth believing it prevents conflict. A friend distorts details to preserve image. In each case, they believe they are controlling perception. What they don't realize is that the very act of deception exposes their inability to handle honesty. The lie becomes less important than what it reveals about their character. This is why lying to an empath always backfires in ways people rarely understand. The lie itself may delay confrontation, but it accelerates clarity. It gives the empath insight into the liar's internal world, their insecurities, their avoidance patterns, their emotional limitations. Every falsehood becomes psychological data. Every inconsistency becomes evidence. And once an empath fully sees that your deception was never about protecting truth, but about protecting your own weakness, something irreversible happens. They stop questioning what you said and start understanding who you are. And there is no greater exposure than being understood by someone you thought you were deceiving.